Do 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 do. Jurassic Park would be very hard to redo today. Partly because it's not just the landscape of action films hasn't just changed so much, more to the kind of Jurassic World side of things, which is a very different film if you actually think about it. It's also because you just shouldn't remake it. It's another one that you just shouldn't remake. They nailed it at the time. All of the effects and everything they used at the time were so well done that, I mean, yeah, you could make it look more CGI-y today, but would that really look better? Yeah. But what we do here is we give it a go anyway, and we say, if they had to, if you literally held a velociraptor to my head and made me recast it, who would I try and choose? Okay, so if we were making it for the first time today, Alan Grant is difficult to cast. Actually, a lot of these roles are, but Alan Grant is especially difficult to cast because he's not an action hero. It's easy to recast action heroes and just say, okay, if it was made today, this type of guy would work as this action hero. Alan Grant is not an action hero. He is literally a scientist, and at no point during this does he suddenly rip off his shirt and go, actually, I'm also an action hero. It's not like that. It's not that kind of film. Same thing goes for Ellie, who we'll talk about shortly. There is no point at which she, tears off her glasses and goes, also, by the way, I'm super sexy. This isn't that kind of film, and that's one of the most beautiful things about it. Alan Grant he's nerdy. He's a scientist. He is competent in this sort of stressful situation. More competent than the average person would be, probably. But there is nothing extraordinary about him. He comes off as a very regular guy, kind of, I would assume, in his 40s. And that made me think, how about Bradley Cooper? Now, obviously, Bradley Cooper is not entirely ordinary. He's a very attractive man, very good-looking man. But he isn't the kind of guy who I would cast as, big, super jacked action heroes. He doesn't play one in the MCU. He plays Rocket. And he's always been a bit more like that, despite even in the Hangover films, when he does come off as just this sexy guy. He's like a teacher. He's like a really caring teacher character. He's not just the guy. And he never has been in any role he does. And that's because, as much as you might think he does fit that, he doesn't fit that. He doesn't. Things like Limitless is where he plays his big leading roles, where he's not an action hero there. He's a normal guy getting enhanced by this pill. And I feel like he would play this scientific character very well, who comes off as level-headed in these situations, but not an especially great action hero or anything like that. He's just terrified of the kids. He's just trying to protect them. Ellie Sattler, it's a weird last name, is also a tricky role to cast, because most of this cast, you're kind of thinking in their 40s or so, and that's weird. For a film like this, you expect people in their early 30s or their early 20s or something, looking super sexy. That's not what Jurassic Park is. It's just not. And that was one of the big differences between this and Jurassic World, is in Jurassic World, obviously if you're recasting that again, you'd be casting a big action hero in Chris Pratt's role. And you'd be casting a sexy lady in her 30s in Bryce Dallas Howard's role. That's not what Jurassic Park is. So if we were recasting that, I would cast Kristen Bell as Ellie Sattler. Because Ellie's role is, again, she's very scientifically focused. She's a total nerd. And again, she comes off as competent, absolutely terrified throughout it. It's halfway to just being a horror movie, Jurassic Park. All of the characters are primarily terrified the whole time. And Ellie is a very interesting role partly because she is a little bit older. And she's not out there immediately going, oh, look at how sexy I am, at any point during the film. And she's great. She's a very fun character. And Kristen Bell, just in anything she's in. Take The Good Place, for example. She just presents such fun, interesting characters who feel very modern, are never worried about being overly sexy, even though she is. And she is approaching that sort of age again, where, she is a mother now, and she very much feels like she could play these maternal roles very well. And Alan and Ellie do take on these very almost parental roles to the kids who have parents. They're just not there. They're just not present during the film. It feels very much like they've almost like created this like little pseudo family on the island because they are forced to. Ian Malcolm is perhaps the hardest of all to recast. Jeff Goldblum, any Jeff Goldblum character, you try and recast him, and it's just so difficult because he is such a unique presence on screen in all ways and all manners, and therefore you couldn't recast him. You wouldn't try and get somebody to play exactly the same character. But if you take the kind of bullet points of the Ian Malcolm character, what are they? He is attractive, knows it, he's cocky, he's very, very smart. I would personally like to see somebody like Jonathan Groff play that role, because, when you see Jonathan Groff, I mean, obviously in the Frozen films, with Kristen Bell, actually. Yeah. When you see him in those, you don't see him. When he's actually on screen doing a live-action character, he's so incredibly memey and funny that he could pull off making Ian Malcolm an endearing character while also being that cocky, that overly smart, and that much of a dick. Because he is. Ian Malcolm's just a bit of a dick in this film. He turns into the protagonist and kind of levels out a bit in the sequel, but in this film he's just lying down most of the time because he's injured, saying very intelligent-sounding lines, being a bit of a cock. And Jonathan Groff would be so good at that. You ever see Hamilton, even just on Disney Plus, you see him as the king. He is... He's so hilarious and memey and hateable, but you love to hate him. Lex and Tim Murphy are just children. They're just children, yeah. The interesting thing about these roles is normally when I cast teenage roles, I'm forced to cast somebody who's a bit older than the actual age. Partly because there aren't that many known quantities at the ages of like 15 or younger in Hollywood. Partly because when you cast a character that is a teenager, normally they feel older than that. The character is meant to feel older than that because they're a big lead or something. They need to take on this hefty responsibility as part of the film. These kids, as much as they are a big part of the film, a lot of screen time, they aren't the leads. And they feel like kids. The characters feel like kids. This whole film has something strangely genuine about it. Because the characters don't feel like action heroes. The characters don't suddenly rip off their shirts and become super sexy. The characters never feel in control. I think that's a big part of it. They are in this situation and they're just spiraling out of control in this tornado with it. It's beautiful. It's such a beautiful film in so many ways. I'd like to cast Tsunaya Sydney as Lex Murphy. Because, I just saw King Richard and she was fantastic. And she did feel... I looked her up after because I thought, oh, she must be like 18 or 19, right? No, she's like, I think 16. She really felt like a kid while also bearing the hefty responsibility of, not quite, but pretty much being the leading character in the film. So incredibly well done at such a young age. And that made me think, okay, so she could do anything. And I think if you let her feel more like just a kid, a helpless kid in this situation. They're all of the characters are helpless kids, essentially, in this situation. If you let her feel like that, she'd do incredibly well as Lex. And then Tim, I want to cast TJ Wright, because he was about 6 years old in The Hate U Give, and he was great. And he's still only about 10 years old now, I think. And that is perfect kind of age for Tim. And yet, if you wanted him to play younger, he could play younger. It's just having a competent kid around that age, which is very hard to find in known quantity for in Hollywood. Or anywhere. We got a few other roles who you might not remember the names of quite as well, but Robert Muldoon was the kind of gamekeeper / scary hunter dude, because you have to have a scary hunter dude, in any of these films. Kong Skull Island, Jurassic World... Scary hunter dude. Yeah, very important to have. Robert Muldoon, he was just very much this sort of intense character. A lot of the time, he was just like like sitting in the office while they were trapped out there and things. He was just kind of sitting there, but he would just, like, the camera would zoom in on his face and he would have this, like, intense line and then it would cut away. Like, that's the sort of role he has. And then obviously he goes out there with the gun with Ellie and gets killed, but that's fine. Seems like the kind of character that they could have, like, kept alive. If they'd known they were going for more franchise, could have kept him alive and brought him back. Would have been fun. I'd like to see Killian Murphy play the role, because I feel like Muldoon was, like, quite a Texasy, like, southerny American accent, but Killian Murphy plays that really well. Or you could have him play this sort of, like, scary British intense guy, which he naturally is. And he's just so good at those roles where he's not necessarily the lead, but he really steals scenes with these, like, intense lines and facial expressions. He's just really good at that in general. Denis Leary is also, it's just not the most important character again, but he's a vital one to remember because he is such a... There are just such memorable scenes, like where the frilly-necked dinosaur, like, at him, and things like that. And, I mean, the crux of the film is based on him fucking up, so... You kind of need to... You don't necessarily want him to be, like, just hateable in it, but he's more of a... You hate him because you hate him character, as opposed to, like, Ian Malcolm as you love because you hate him. I'd like to see Josh Gad play the role, because apparently I'm just casting all of Frozen in this. I just realized that. Ray Arnold, again. Samuel L. Jackson, just, you know, you just need a Samuel L. Jackson character in some of these films sometimes. And obviously I'm not going to recast Samuel L. Jackson, even though he totally could still just play the character. Yep. I'm going to cast Don Cheadle, because you want, again, somebody who feels like they can be there, be present, be competent at their job, but not suddenly turn into an action hero. Honestly, if you cast Samuel L. Jackson today, I'd be expecting him to turn into an action hero. Yeah. Don Cheadle, obviously, he does play an action hero sometimes, but as well as that, he's done roles like Hotel Rwanda, where he... I mean, that's a similar situation. I'm not going to compare the films too much, but it's a similar situation to Jurassic Park. He's in charge of all this hotel, and he's engaged in this terrifying situation, but he's way more scared than anybody else is. That's similar to this. And finally, John Hammond. Yes. John Hammond, again, he's doing this dangerous thing, building this park. He's brought them all here without telling what's going on. He's kind of Dumbledore-ish in that I shouldn't like this character. He's not necessarily the good guy here, but you do love him as a character. He's such a lovable old man. Again, he has so many epic lines where the camera zooms in on him, and he's just got such a lovely, like, old man smile about him. He feels, surprisingly, Santa-ish, yeah, because he literally, Richard Attenborough also played Santa in Miracle on 34th Street. And he's just delightful. He's just so delightful in that role. What I happened to have done earlier is cast a couple of child actors of color as his grandchildren, just in case I felt like maybe I wanted to, I don't know, cast Morgan Freeman. Yeah, obvious. It's obvious. But it's surprising because you think through a lot of other old man actors out there, it is difficult to feel like one of them isn't going to come off as slightly villainish in this role. Guys like Michael Caine, great at playing sweet old men. But I don't know, I feel like he'd come off as like slightly villainish in this role. Morgan Freeman just wouldn't, because he's just such a delightful old man, but he's got the gravitas of the welcome to Jurassic Park, that sort of thing. And that's all for this one, folks. There are a lot of fan casts out there to do, but we are putting pretty much a stop to them probably until January, because we've got Christmas fan casts to do. That's right. Leave in the comments what Christmassy fan cast you want to see on the channel. Let me know, and we will try to get through a bunch of them. Yeah.